everybody. It is 6 o'clock, and I'd like to call to order this meeting, 29 November 2022 meeting of the King George County Planning Commission. A note for the record that we do, albeit just barely, have a quorum. So if we could note that, I'd appreciate it. And if you would, at this time, if you can, please stand and we'll recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag. Stand, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty. May be seated. All right. Moving on to public comment period for the evening. Hey, Mr. Williams. Moving on to public comment period for the evening. Again, there's no public hearing for this evening, so this is just general public comment. If there's anybody that wishes to speak or address the Planning Commission, please approach the podium. Please state your name and address and limit your comments to 3 minutes. And at this point, we will turn it over for public comment.
May I give each of you a handout?
Certainly. Thank you, sir.
I'm Dr. Arn Eliason. I reside at 12,000 LaGrange Lane in King George. I'm a physician who's board certified in internal medicine and in sleep medicine. And my remarks tonight will focus on the effects of noise on our health and our happiness. Noise pollution is always considered to be an urban problem, but noise levels have been increasing steadily in King George over the years. We consider it to be the invisible pollutant. The federal government sets standards through OSHA and NIOSH about loudness and duration of exposure that is allowable. And they do that in order to limit hearing loss. But our considerations have to be more sensitive than hearing loss, because merely protecting hearing loss is not good for our quality of life. Lower levels of noise have consequences too, and I refer you to the second page of the handout where I gave you a brief reference list for some of the recent studies that will document what I'm about to cover. Any noise perceived as annoying will have physiological consequences. Such a stimulus provokes an adrenaline surge, resulting in rapid heart rate, hypertension, anxiety, in other words, raised hackles. But if persistent, these physiological responses create a chronic stress response with diagnosable mood disorders such as anxiety and depression. Adrenaline surges cause disruptions of the body's circadian rhythms, chronic hypertension, and cardiovascular disease, which is the #1 killer of Americans in 2022. That's stroke and heart attack. As a sleep doctor, I often evaluate and treat insomnia. Noise is an integral issue that causes or exacerbates insomnia. Noises at night may be particularly troublesome, and while noise at low decibels may help some people get to sleep, such noise can keep other people awake. As everyone is aware, King George is home to many kinds of animals, both domestic and wild. The effects of noise is less well studied in animals, but we know that they are affected more greatly than humans by high-frequency sounds and lower levels of sounds. Noise affects fertility in animals, may disrupt nesting birds, affects migration patterns. Chickens may stop laying eggs. As the county moves forward with plans for development and changes in ordinances, it is critical that we consider noise to be a factor that is carefully evaluated and that we mitigate against increased noise. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. Anybody else wishing to speak? Good
Hello.
evening.
I'm coming before you again. My name is John Edgar. I'm a 16-year resident here. My address is 4250 Stafford Lane. I want to talk to you again about the possibility of changing the ordinance to allow for commercial wineries. I would also like to find out how we can possibly get a waiver or an exception to the current ordinance so that we could get started as soon as possible if it's going to be approved in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. Any additional public comments? If there's none in the audience, Mr. Dines, do we have anyone online?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. All right, next on the agenda is Community Planning Liaison Officer, Naval Support Facilities South Potomac. Do we have our liaison officer, sir?
Hello, this is Thomas Hastings. No updates. Thank you.
Thomas, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, next item on the agenda is plan review. We have none. Next, we're doing them in the next full meeting. We've just got a bunch of them queued up. Plan review, we have none. Public hearings, we have none. And that moves us on to item number 8 on the agenda, which is old business. And that brings us to the Berkeley Group. So we will turn it over to them for zoning and subdivision ordinance update. Welcome, y'all. Thank you for coming.
Hello, everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. New face, I'm Stephanie, this is Rebecca. You're a new face, right?
I apologize for that.
Okay.
My bad. Mr. Ian Fox, representing at large. He is our latest member of the Planning Commission, and I am remiss for not introducing him. Please excuse my lapse. I'm sorry.
Nice to meet you. Okay, this one is going to be hopefully a little maybe quicker, I dare say, quicker and smoother than some of the other ones we've had. We're just going to go over subdivision tonight. A couple of things before we get started. Just a note on the subdivision, and it's in your footnotes. It looks drastically different than what you have, but overall your policy is pretty much unchanged. There are a few things, 2, 3, maybe 4 things that have wildly changed. We'll go over those tonight. But overall, even though it looks much different than what you have now, the big things are really the same. One other housekeeping thing. This will be my last work session with you all. I'm moving back onto the public side of things. I'll be finishing the year out with Berkeley Group, so doing a little bit more work with you all, but this is the last time I'll see your faces. So I just wanted to let you know, Rebecca is still your woman on the job. So maybe a couple other.
It wasn't us.
It was not.
Okay.
Rest assured, it was not.
Just making sure. Okay.
No. But I did want to let you all know. So I don't know who will be here with Rebecca next time, but I'm sure they will be wonderful. So with that, we'll get started. And we have, there's one thing I want to not really go over, but check in with you all. It would help if I turned it on. Just a quick reminder too, I want to say we're about halfway through the overall process. We're a little over that, but after tonight, the drafting of the meat is over. We have a couple of things to go back to. The military overlay is still something that's hanging out. As you all know, some of those industrial standards we might want to take a second look at. But overall, the drafting after tonight, the hard work is done. And hopefully from here, it's smooth sailing. So again, just going through this, we've reached just about every article, a couple things to go back and to button up, but we've reached the end here. So to follow up before we dive into subdivision, last time we were here, there was a comment about why do we want to regulate residential fencing? Do we want to? Should we be doing it? We don't do it now. And it came in some staff discussion as well. So I wanted to bring it back to you all tonight and just ask a pretty simple yes or no. Is there a desire to regulate residential fencing, or should we leave it to commercial and industrial, maybe even multifamily, but not so much those townhomes, duplexes, single family?
And I'll add while you're pondering is when staff reviewed this, they posed questions about their ability to enforce, and that if it's, countywide, then that can be enforcement problem. So.
And up here on the slide, there are a couple of just highlights of what the residential regulations look like. We had a height maximum, and it was pretty standard overall for material. The nice materials are allowed, the plywood, the recycled wine bottles, those things are not allowed, regardless. And the other thing about residential is we were allowing chain link. So it was pretty flexible anyway, but it did have that height maximum. I think that was specifically what got brought up here at the work session. So we don't have to dive too deep if it's something you all want to talk about when you have maybe everyone here and get it back to us. But we really just, we're looking for a yes, or on second thought, let's keep it to commercial and industrial.
I don't know. We can probably get a lot done tonight. So no, so it's interesting. After we had our last meeting, and I was having to ride around the county, and I saw a fence made of pallets, and right. So, but it was a really well done fence made of pallets, but nonetheless made of pallets. So I don't know. I'll turn it over to the planning commissioner to see what y'all think.
Can anything
quick
come from
question.
public comment on this?
What'd you say? Sorry.
Public comment address this?
We haven't had any yet. We've had, I want to say back in the public engagement, I would have to go back and look at it. There were some overall agreements and call for beautification, but not a stance on fencing either way.
I'm just trying to get a sense of where this comes from. Is it coming from staff or is it coming from public engagement?
I think planning commission and staff, sort of
From us.
the inside, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, in terms of drafting it, it was placed. I had it on. I remember nothing specific about fencing from the community engagement, but there was this desire, we want King George to be beautiful and to look nice. And that's one of the tools that can help with that so that you don't end up with atrocious fences. You know, there's also the potential here if it's, I think, are you complaint based right now in terms of your enforcement? So being complaint based, we could reduce what is here and take out the height requirement and say maybe we're less concerned about that. And our concern is the materials that's used, and that could stay in if that's something that you do want to allow a neighbor to complain and say, I've got this really ugly, you know, somebody's put up a tarp as a fence. So if you want that mechanism there, then that portion can stay in and we could take out the height, but just some various things to consider.
I feel like the only way to do that is to be very, very ambiguous about, for instance, no eyesores. Well, who's going to define what an eyesore is?
I was going to say, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, correct? So,
So I think it would be better to have it, and at least we have something to fall back on in the event. Right, it is going to be an enforcement issue, like everything. We have signs. I mean, there's a ton of stuff we have that are enforcement issues that we don't have enough people to enforce. But we at least have the ability to enforce it if there's something to stand behind. Whereas right now we don't. So you can have pallet fences.
For clarification, does this apply to A1 and A2?
This would be the way that it's written now. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rebecca. It would not be. Actually, before I say this, the way that it's written now, and I could be misremembering, it would be residential districts. We could word it so that it's residential period. Agricultural fencing is exempt regardless, if that's, you know, for a legitimate reason. If it's keeping livestock in, if it's agricultural related, it's exempt. But if you have a residential subdivision in an A1 district and we say residential in these standards, that would apply. Unless you only want it to be those residential districts specifically, and whatever goes on in ag goes on in ag. But since you all have so many subdivisions in those ag districts, I would say if you're going to go residential all the way. But Rebecca's looking it up to see the exact terminology. And another thing is I think it's better to sort of make your decisions and get your stance before the end. But this is certainly one of those things you could leave it in and see how the public reacts. If they say, hey, whoa, 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 we don't want this, we trust our neighbors, I want to do my fence, you could have a conversation then and sort of revisit it. Start higher and go lower versus starting low and then trying to build up.
Well, I think we should have standards that a homeowner can understand prospectively and not realize of a violation post hoc. You should have a standard that's interpretable and readily. You wait for a complaint is not a governance.
Any other thoughts on it?
I disagree. I just don't want to get into regulating something, that kind of minutia.
I say take the standard away then. I mean, I think the standoff distances and materials, but unsightly opens the door to what is unsightly. I think we could have a maintenance, poorly maintained ugly fence.
Well, kind of to Rebecca's point, if you wanted to scale it way back and take out the materials, take out the height, and just put some provisions, it has to be maintained. So if it is a tarp fence and it's torn and tattered and ripped at every side and falling apart, there would be something to fall back on. Obviously, it's still complaint based. Someone would have to complain. But you can really scale it back to truly it just looking nice, whether that's my version of nice or someone else's version of nice aesthetically, as long as it's in proper form and it's not ripped or splintered or broken. That would give you some control to make sure it's, looking neat and clean.
The other thing about fences that concerns me, though, is that if we have something about maintenance of a fence, it's not just the county against the homeowner, it's the county getting in between two homeowners, because that fence is more than likely on a property line between two owners. Do we want to get in the middle of that?
I don't think we do.
No.
I feel like I'm hearing two take it outs. Are there any more take it outs?
I'd just rather have it than not. I mean, I know it's going to be something we need to probably put some granularity in, but I'd rather have it than not have it. So I'm thinking, if you got something you want to hide, and you got a bunch of pretty ugly materials laying around, you're going to hide ugly stuff with ugly stuff, and at least
No, I hear you. I was thinking about our new occupational, home business standards and number of vehicles you can park, and there's going to be pressures on that both ways. So I say, well, first, if we have a standard, it should be understandable by a layperson in print. And second, I'd like the maintenance. Fences must be maintained.
So we have that. To remind everyone, what is currently drafted for walls and fences is there is a purpose and intent statement about keeping things safe and preventing unsightly things. It applies countywide, and it's more about we exempt some things, like she mentioned with agricultural fences or fences for tree protection, erosion sediment control, those types of things are exempt. And then where we get into some division, some specifics is regarding heights for whether it's a commercial, industrial, or residential area. And then there is a specific list of permitted materials, which says, it can be wood, composite wood, it can be wrought iron, it can be decorative metal, brick, stone, and then there are prohibited things like debris, junk, rolled plastic, sheet metal, plywood, and then we have rules about chain link fencing, allowing it in ag, R1, R2, and then in R3, commercial and industrial, if it is the black chain link or dark green. And then there is maintenance requirements saying that it has to be in good repair, safe and attractive condition, that there needs to be replacement of missing, decayed, or broken or structural decorative elements. So that is it in a quick summary.
I can support what you're saying in R1, R2, R3, R4. I don't think it's necessary in A1, A2, even if that's cluster, because if it's cluster, it's probably gonna be governed by HOA. So R1, R2, we could specify R1, R2, R3, R4. I hate this ambiguous language about residentially zoned and agriculturally zoned properties. And this is gonna come up again when we talk about blocks tonight. If you cluster in A2, it's residential, but it can be interpreted as agricultural because it's still A2. And we need to get rid of that ambiguous language here and there, I think.
But what about the safety concerns in subdivisions that are still, even in A2, for example, safety concerns with fencing and maintenance and so forth? The
By
HOA,
right, for a by right subdivision, in other words, not cluster, but by right.
well, I'm thinking any residential, even if it is an ag, there's still even if you take the issue of how it looks away, there's the safety concern. I kind of agree with Mr. Parker. It's better to have it to fall back on than, you know.
Let's go down the line. Mr. Watkins, what do you think?
I kind of like the standard that's already written. I know it's kind of wide open, but at least it gives us room to build and grow on that instead of getting down to yes and no, yes and no. I kind of like what's already kind of written.
Mr. Kendrick, we were just talking about language about fencing, specifically standards for fencing. They're fine. They're fine. No, we can come back if you like. Mr. Williams.
How you doing, Mr. Parker?
Good. How are you doing, sir?
Doing well, thank you. Things I agree with what you said earlier. It's kind of like it's always to have something and not need it, and to need it and not have it. But as we all talked about the policing of it, you know, who's gonna be the fence police, you know? But again, I think again, just having it in place, I think would be okay. I think would set us up for future growth endeavors.
Agrees? We kind of know.
Remain unmoved. I don't want to regulate this.
Okay. Smalls?
I'm for having fencing in. I agree that we should look at it, R1, R2. Ag, if it's cluster, will be HOA more than likely. And if nothing else, it gets us to a starting point. So if we find that we've got issues, we can bring it back up and we can adjust from there. But having a starting point, I think, is important.
Yeah, bro, I think we're free.
I remain what I said. I kind of think it's better to have it to fall back on and not. I can kind of see the argument of not having it in by right and ag, but I still think it's okay the way it's written.
Corda?
I'd modify it to exclude ag A1, 2. I think I'm a little troubled by the unsightly materials, unless we're specific about those materials.
I will say, I put unsightly on the slide just to be concise. It's not as vague in the draft. We talk about specific materials. This was just so you could get an idea. It's talking about, again, I've kept all 100 wine bottles I've had in the last month and I've turned them into a fence, or I have this old, chicken wire that I have left over. I'm going to turn this into my front yard fence. Just to sort of bunch those in so you can get an idea of what that would mean. But the draft does not say unsightly. It's a little more specific.
All right. I'd say the A1, A2 thing, I think is something that should be assumed to be excluded.
Yeah, I'm more or less in line with what's been said. First, I do believe if we're going to say anything, it has to be very clear and unambiguous on its face, how to interpret it, what it means. I think A1 and A2 should be clearly carved out from this. I think that HOAs should have clear authority to, require tougher standards if they want to. And in residential areas, yeah, I would be fine with essentially just setting a height limit, maybe 6 feet perhaps is about right. And then stating, as you have there, that there are certain materials that be prohibited, particularly discarded debris and so on and so forth. And that I don't have any objection to saying they be kept in a good and safe condition and so forth, right?
Okay, so I think it's consensus maybe to keep it, but we could meet in the middle and maybe specifically say instead of residential, it's R1, R2, R3. Do you want to do A3 as well, or leave that out?
We can have so little of that. Let's go ahead and put it in there with the residential pieces, and then we'll
Okay.
mark it as a placeholder. And
Okay. R1, R2, R3. And to your point, Mr. Fox, you said 6 feet. We have it at 7. Does anyone want to make it 6 feet, or are you happy with 7? 7. Okay. All right. I think we have our marching orders for that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for facilitating that. Are you ready to get to subdivision?
Yes, we
Okay.
are.
There's one more thing I want to cover. Sorry, I'm a little absent-minded tonight. So wetlands and stormwater, you all probably got that in your packets. We're not going to review that tonight, but for sake of transparency, keeping you all in the loop, public, everybody sort of clued in, these are 2 articles that are in your current zoning ordinance that we typically do not recommend to be in there. We have them sort of sit outside. So what we've done is we've pulled them out. We brought this up throughout the process. If they ever came up in drafting, we would make little footnotes, hey, this used to include something about wetlands or stormwater. We suggest moving that. So what we've done is we've pulled them out. We've updated any code references to the latest thing or any other references that might have needed to be updated. We looked at, Stafford, Spotsylvania, Caroline, just to see if everything's sort of in line, if you're up to par with each other, and some minor reorganization tweaks. But overall, again, we didn't change the policy to these things, but just wanted to make you aware of them. So if you want to review them, if you've already done that and you do have some really pressing things that will make you lose sleep, get them to staff and then they can give them to us. But I just wanted to call it out tonight so that you all know we looked at it. We've reorganized, we moved some things around, and we are suggesting that lives in the county code outside of the zoning ordinance. That could either be together in a brand new chapter. You could even put it with the ENS so that all the environmental things are kind of together in a nice little home together. But as of now, it's sort of ready to plug and play. It can just go right into the code as is. Any questions about it without diving too deep, just so we can get to subdivision?
I'm assuming the reason for that is because it's pretty much state regulated and we're just trying to reflect what the state says. So
Correct.
it's going to be.
Correct.
Okay.
Same reason, erosion and sediment control are usually outside of it.
And there are different penalties and fees for violating these codes versus violating a zoning ordinance code. And so it becomes complicated to have, talk about fees and enforcement in one portion of your zoning ordinance and then have another, oh no, this actually is different here in these separate articles for wetlands and stormwater. And so lots of localities actually do not have these in their zoning ordinance, and they will do a chapter of their code that's like environmental. And so it has wetlands, stormwater, and erosion and sediment control all in one place.
Okay. With that, we'll get to Article 10. So this is your subdivision article. It's sort of replacing that standalone subdivision, and now it's going to be in together. So just a quick thing here. This also goes for appealing it, amendments, violation, those sorts of things. So the divisions that we have here, the breakdown of this article is your general stuff, just those typical run-of-the-mill bits. Types of subdivisions, we'll go over those. There are 4: major, minor, family, and single lot. Design requirements, this is your streets, blocks, access, utilities, those sorts of things. Guarantees, the types, the amount that it can be, how it's released. This division is really specific on Code of Virginia. They really dictate what you can include, what you can't. Timeframes, dollar amounts, percentages, those sorts of things. Next up, we have preliminary plats, when they're applicable, what needs to be on them, how they're reviewed. Same with final plats. Then we move on to construction plans, the vacation of plats, and then finally enforcement, violations, and fees. The little snapshot here that we usually give you to show you how we got to this draft that's in front of you. A lot of this, as I've already mentioned, it's restructuring what you already have. There's a lot of repetition in multiple places in the current subdivision ordinance. We got you up to code, whether it's updated references, maybe some timeframes were out of whack. We've added a couple of optional provisions. We'll go over a couple of those tonight. They're also in your footnotes. And then, of course, as usual, just things that we heard throughout public engagement early on in the process. So we're going to take this a little differently than we've done it before. Sometimes I just sort of dive right in. We're going to take it division by division. And just again, since we didn't change a lot of the policy, even though it looks different, we're going to go over the big changes and dive into those. As usual, if there's anything that you all found that you want to go over, we'll go over it before we move on to the next division, if that works. So first up is Division 2, which is the types of subdivisions. So what we've done here is we've given you 4 categories. Basically what you have now, pretty run-of-the-mill. Major subdivisions, minor subdivisions, single lot subdivisions, 1 into 2, and then family subdivisions. The big change that we've done here, and we're going to start hot right off the top. Currently, your major subdivisions are 6 or more lots. We have changed this, and we brought it up briefly in the open space standards. We have proposed to change this to 10 or more lots. This came up when we were drafting the open space requirements, and we were looking at the existing subdivision ordinance. In those subdivision requirements for open space, it's contingent on 10 or more lots. So that's where the idea came from, and we kind of said, that's great, let's run with it. It'll ease up some more opportunity for administratively approved plats. It's an easier number to work with. So just so you know how and why we got to that number. So in light of that, that would then make minor subdivisions 3 to 9 lots, whereas right now it's 5 or less. So before we jump too far into family, because that's its own bucket of things, I want to have a discussion with this jumping of 10 or more lots. So going from 6 or more to 10 or more. I know that there is a concern in the county for an abundance of private roads. One of the cons of this would be more private roads. So if that's a concern in this change, we should talk about it. There are a couple of alternatives. There may be other things that are on your mind. So I'll give it over to you and let you start, and we'll just sort of hash this out.
Is it accurate to say that minor subdivisions are not reviewed by Planning Commission? They are approved administratively only, correct?
Correct.
So we want to bump that up to 10 where we don't have any review.
So let me go back a little bit, just from the Genesis question. Is 10, I always wonder where the numbers come from. So is 10 more of like a state standard? Is that what?
There really isn't a standard. Everybody's kind of different. Usually you'll go with what your neighbor's doing. This is one of those things that I can earnestly tell you there is no average. There is no common. It's sort of just what works or what's happened, and it doesn't change often. So this one is entirely up to you all. You can take it and make it your own, and it doesn't matter what your neighbors are doing. But to answer your question, most people would go with what their neighbors are doing, whether or not it's the right fit for them.
Could you just remind us what's driving this recommendation? What do you
Sure.
see as the benefits to the county
Sure.
by implementing
So
this?
a couple of things just to ease your all's review. You have a lot on your plate. You sort of act as BZA sometimes. You review a lot. So one of the pros would be to give more administrative review for some of these plats. We've not too much. You were already in line, but the plat requirements have been beefed up. They ask for a lot. A lot needs to be shown. They should be in a very good place for staff to look at it and check it off. And then again, to just keep in line with those current standards that you all have for open space. But other than that, it's to try something new. The pros again would be private streets. That would be the biggest one, is that you all don't see these. That could be a pro or a con, depending on how you look at it. And then the increase of private streets would be the two big things you need to weigh here.
So just to fill in my lack of knowledge, homeowners associations are required in major subdivisions. Would they be required in minor?
What we've done in this draft, we'll get to it in a few slides. What we've done here, and Louis, tell me, I'll give my spiel and then tell me what you all normally do. What we are proposing is that any subdivision, major or minor, if it has anything common or shared, utilities, stormwater, private streets, open space, park, whatever it is, it has to have an HOA. So regardless of size, if it has something that's shared, it will require an HOA. I don't know what happens now.
So generally, minor subdivisions, the way we have it now, don't have any shared. There's no open space requirement. There usually isn't any stormwater infrastructure that is shared. So those would not have HOAs, but ones that do require open space, which would be 10 or more lots, and also one cluster, of course, also has would be required to have an HOA.
I guess my concern is about the roads. If we, are bumping it from 6 to 10 before you have to have a county or a state-owned road, you now got a private road, and the few examples that I hear about are that's where all the conflict occurs. Is how are you going to get the road repaired, paved, do regular maintenance on it, drainage ditches along the side, how are those going to be taken care of? And if you don't have an HOA, it's an issue. So from my point of view, I don't have a problem with going from 6 to 10 as long as we sort of address that, which means if it's a subdivision, it requires an HOA.
This is also something we'll get to in a few minutes, and I don't mean to make your head too swirly, but it's up here on the slide. We kind of expected this, and we thought you might say that, not you specifically, but somebody might bring this up. So we thought of a couple of alternatives. One would be keep what you have, but if everyone is amenable to 10 and it makes sense, but those private roads are giving you heartburn, what we could do is bump it up to 10, but in the streets requirements, allow private streets, but if it's a minor subdivision of 5 or more, they need to be public. So still allowing that increase, but still requiring public streets if it's of a certain size, which would be the size that you're familiar with now. Does that make sense?
Well, did you think about just bumping up the design standards and saying any private street must be hard surfaced and not gravel?
We didn't do that, but we could if that's something else that you all think would work in lieu of these changes or just as better. And we'd still have that HOA language. I don't know what section it is. I can't remember off the top of my head, but that would still also be in there that says anything shared, anything common will require that HOA as just a second
definitely.
sort of crutch. Yep.
Without a doubt.
So that's an option too that we did not think of. So thank you, Mr. DeVries. So
Sure.
if that's something you all like or piques your interest, we can talk about it.
So my concern would be a landowner decides to take a fairly large parcel, break it up into, whatever the zoning requires, into 10 or fewer lots, that anybody who buys into that
clearly understands how everything's being taken care of, because, you know, we've heard it here before. They roll in and they somehow think we're gonna take care of the roads for them.
Right, right.
The idea of standards, width, drainage, and, you know, but then we get into a VDOT spec, which is probably prohibitive too, but paved and maintained and under HOA is probably, if it's a shared responsibility, liability, I guess there has to be some structure. But yeah, a well-maintained, you know, we have emergency vehicles going through, but it's the larger landholders that will be dividing, doing these 10 luxury lot subdivisions. And gravel doesn't work for EMS. It just doesn't.
Rebecca just reminded me there's also a third, if you will, piece that requires maintenance. It's in 1038 H 2 6 that requires a maintenance agreement for private streets. So this is now two or the third maybe spot where we say private streets have to be in a communal ownership or looked after, not responsibility of the county. So there are a couple times throughout here that sort of drive that. There's plenty of it to fall back on.
And I'll say, this is a hefty question and probably the biggest one. You know, there's a lot of things weighing on whether, you know, which way you want to go. And so this might be an item that you want to pause on and we talk through the other items. And then as you kind of get a bigger picture of what all is in the ordinance, and then maybe we come back to this question at the end and settle on that. Might be an option as well.
That's a good idea, because it is difficult to talk about this across the whole spectrum of what we're trying to envision. Applying this to a A2 cluster is so much different from applying it to mixed use. You know, so we're probably going to end up looking at additional street standards for those sorts of districts, high density districts anyway.
Yeah, I think
But going back to the beginning, I'm still stuck on 3 lots
yeah, this is one of those things
rather than bumping up to 10.
I wouldn't mind getting a little bit more public comment on this one too, honestly, as we go out, because this would have a huge impact on neighboring properties, right? So you're talking about increasing the definition of a major subdivision by, you know, almost doubling it, right? So this is something we probably should, as we move forward, but we can certainly look at it through this evening too.
And we have given up a lot already. We don't review plats anymore. That's all done administratively.
Right.
All it has to do is conform with the GDP. So we've already given up quite a lot of our responsibility. So is the Board of Supervisors.
This rule, last week you'll never see line of force. Good thing or bad thing? Keep the standard, except keep it to 5 or less. 5 to 9. Leave it up to the staff to refer to the planning commission or not. Or just make the standard 6 or above.
So one thing that I would say for you to consider while you're making this decision is thinking about the subdivision requests that you get now, and are those things that you need a lot to say no, or to have them make changes? Have there been a lot of concerns or things like that that you all need to help the applicant along the right path. And so if that answer is yes, then maybe you do need to maintain some control. Or if that answer is yes, maybe there's some specific things that aren't in your current ordinance that you want to make sure are in this ordinance. Or if it's beyond that, then yes, maybe keep it at your lower threshold so that you see it. So that's what I would say to kind of weigh and see, are you saying no to subdivisions? What are the problems coming forward with subdivisions? And go from that perspective.
I think part of our goal and part of our responsibility is to prepare for the next update of the strategic plan, the master plan. That's the next thing. And just simple situational awareness and what's going on in the county where. And we can target residential areas or land use foci, but it's where the people go is where you got to build the sidewalks. It's where they migrate to. And if that's not visible to somebody at some level in some coherent sense, I consider that part of our duties.
Do you all want to keep going through these things and sort of see what else comes up? Okay, and then we'll come back to this. I don't think that I will forget, but if I start to get up and leave, tell me to go back.
Depends on what time it is.
Okay, so next up is family. And we made a couple of tweaks here, but we'll talk about them. And the ones that we talk about are kind of up to you. They're either optional or you can tweak the time frame. So I'll go ahead and go over them and then we can talk about them. So this is section 10.2.4. You all already have family subdivision language in case you didn't know that. What we've done here in item B3 is we've added an optional provision from code that basically allows these family subdivisions for immediate family that's in a trust or a land trust. And then item C2 and C3 are the ones that I really want to talk about. We've added a provision that the property that is to be subdivided as a family subdivision is owned for at least 5 years by that owner or an immediate family member. And then tying into that, sort of piggybacking off of each other, item C3, we increase the time frame that the grantee then has to hold that land. Right now it's 5 years. We have increased this to 15. So it basically keeps it, so for a 20-year time frame, it's within family, and it's not in family's possession for maybe 5-10 years, and then it gets transferred out to a stranger or someone outside of the family. Again, these are either optional, we can tweak the time frame. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rebecca. C3, code, you can only go up to 15, but you can make it any amount. Like I said, right now you're at 5 years. So, Mr. DeVries, if you subdivide your land to your brother, he has to keep it for 5 years and then he can do what he wants. We're saying he needs to keep it for 15, and that you needed to own it for at least 5 before you subdivide it to him. So that's sort of what we're doing here. And this is just to ensure that family subdivisions are made for family subdivisions and not used as a circumvention to other requirements.
Quick question. Are you proposing minimum lot size or proportionality with respect to family subdivisions in any way, or is that just going to be consistent with?
That would be consistent. They'd still have to meet, I think there's a provision here, it says that it still has to meet any lot requirements or district requirements. I'll look and see.
Okay. If it's consistent with everything else, then I don't have any issues. Thanks.
I don't see any reason to bump it up from 5 years as it is now, but I would like to see an addition of no additional divisions from the parent parcel for more than one per calendar year. Does that make sense? In other words, you can't do one and then 6 months later do another one.
I don't think the state code allows you to do that.
State code won't let you anyway.
It says that you can only give, so you can only, like the example she gave, your brother, you can only give one parcel one time. That's your family gift to them. But if you have another family member, you can cut a different parcel off for a different family member. And state code allows that.
So you're saying it would be against state code to deny them to do that more than once per year, once per calendar year?
To my knowledge, state code does not allow you, it doesn't give you the right to make that limitation.
Really?
Dillon rules state. So, if state code doesn't say localities can restrict this, number of times, then I don't think that you can do it.
I mean, about 10 years ago, I did one in Spotsylvania that was like that. So Spotsylvania was written that way at that time. Maybe they've changed it because it was against the law.
So explain to me again, it was that
You can do one division from the parent parcel per calendar year. In other words, you can't do two. You can't do one, come back a month later and do another one.
but was that for family division or in general?
Specifically for family exempt subdivisions.
Interesting.
That wouldn't be allowable under this, though, correct?
It would.
So would it?
She's saying it's not according to the state, but it's not written that way here.
Right. Currently, as it's written, you can this month give to your daughter and next month give to your son and
Right.
State code won't allow us to restrict that further.
we can look into that. I'm interested in that.
What
But
would be the purpose of the time limit if, say, you gave it to your brother and then gave some to your sister?
Trying to circumvent the subdivision ordinance and basically do a minor subdivision in a year, piece by piece by piece.
and I
If you
think
only have
that's
X number of of immediate family members anyways, you can't create more of them. I mean, I guess you could.
Well, the division
You've
of
got two
family,
brothers and a sister, and you're gonna give each of them a parcel, whether it's done over 3 years or all at once. It's still only those three, right? Am I correct?
right. And I think the same purpose token of that you can't do more than one is the time frame that someone has to hold it. And if you're going to require, that whoever you grant it to, they can't sell it off immediately, then that helps with that circumvention. So I think the same purpose is achieved there by that time frame.
Or just by holding the time?
It's up to each locality in terms of what you think is appropriate. Louis, do you know how many family subdivisions? Is that a frequent thing? And is there concern with circumvention through that process?
Currently, our ordinance, again, it says the grantee only has to own it for 5 years. There isn't a limit on it, so you could actually, give it to your 5 kids, your wife, and your sister, sort of all at once. And I mean, it depends on how you look at that or what the circumstances are, if that could be viewed as a circumvention or not.
Have you had any feedback from the public on the 5-year limit?
We haven't had any feedback to my knowledge about the 5-year limit. Most of the comments we've had regarding family subdivisions usually comes back to what we were discussing earlier, which be private road access.
Okay. I like the 5 years because people's lives do change rapidly these days, Wouldn't want to make such an imposition of 15 years to make it harder for people to make a decision to do this.
And kind of piggybacking on that, is there a provision if there may be, and I overlooked it? So say it is 15 years and you give grandma a home at 80 and she passes away at 90, then who holds it for the next 15 years, or does that end when she passes away?
There are some exemptions to allow you out of that. or if there's a divorce or a foreclosure and things like that. You can also, I think you can even appeal to the county, if there's some type of hardship situation or something like that, you can be excused from the time limit.
So the major advantage to the property holder who divides it for family is the relief from the road requirement? Is that,
They can do private roads. hmm And this would be a subdivision that is administratively approved.
so that's a
Also,
major advantage to a landholder.
there is, just before I forget to tell you, there is a provision in these 3 sections of code that specifically say that the locality can, it's optional, prohibit or limit these to 1 acre lots. So if it's a family subdivision, it can't be more than 1 acre. That may be another way to sort of to deflate the possibility of circumventing, of making little tiny minor subdivisions everywhere. If grandma only gets an acre, cousin Jeff gets an acre, my brother gets an acre. So that's an option too. We didn't include that in here, but it's in code and it's an option for you.
So Mr. DeCorda, I don't think we're talking about private roads. I think we're talking about just driveways in my understanding of what we're doing.
I mean, in
A
terms
lot
of
here and a lot
advantage,
there would just be a driveway. I don't think there'd be any road requirements for 2, 3 lots.
Mr. DeVries, what I was referring to earlier with the private road complaints we get, it's that the current ordinance says that when a family subdivision is being done, it has to front on a public road or a road that meets the requirements of this ordinance. So if it's along an existing non-conforming private road, it wouldn't even be eligible for a family subdivision. I believe this new ordinance would change that, so that you would be able to do a family subdivision on that road, but there would still be access standards within the family subdivision itself, correct? Do I have that?
Let's take C2. Do we want to keep that optional provision that the person that's subdividing that land off to their brother, grandma, or mother needs to have owned it for 5 years? Keep or toss? Keep?
I see
Keep.
majority head nods.
Okay, we'll keep that. What about the increase in C3? So again, we're saying that I sold it, I subdivided it off to my grandma. Bad example. Let's say brother. He has to keep it for 15 years. Do you want to keep that at 5 like you currently have? Do you want to go 10, 12, 4? You can go in any span up to 15.
I think the risk is accidental pop-up subdivision.
No, I don't agree with that. I think 5 is sufficient. I mean, 15 that's a lot. That's a long time.
10 years, that's much quicker than you think. I'm just, the family subdivision was to allow family members to share a parcel of land and live close to each other for support reasons or whatever, they have going on. But I just, maybe I'm worried about something that shouldn't be worried about, but I just see them turning into something that we don't really want or intend. If we start saying family subdivisions can have 1 acre lots, but that's not what the zoning is, 10 years from now, you've got a non-conforming kind of a development in there, and who knows, maybe owning parcels of it. I do agree that, family dynamics change fairly quickly, and, 5 years, there could be substantial things going on, but the idea is that was always intended to be a family subdivision, and I'd sort of like some assurance that it stays a family subdivision. I don't know that 15 is necessary, but
Doing exactly this. I can conceive in a state planning scenario where a person of means could say, well, I want to have a subdivision, but I don't want to have to go through all the hassle. Say, you know, kids, in your names, here are these lots. And 5 years from now, because it's not tying up capital per se, you could have a subdivision, non-conforming subdivision in 5 or 6 years.
I think you're making a good point. I think maybe I'm reading more into what you're saying than you're saying, but it sounds like it only transfers to a family member by deed. That family member could conceivably rent it out to somebody else and just hold it in the deed, correct?
Yeah, 15 starting to make sense.
So I hear 3 people say 15 makes sense. Any others agree with 15?
so, Mr. Chairman, this is, when we're done with all this is gonna go to a public hearing?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
That'll give us one more opportunity to hear what the public.
It's actually going to have 3 opportunities. So we're going to do an open house, and then it's going to come back after the open house. You'll be able to adjust and refine things that you heard from the public before it goes to public hearing.
So if we could sort of note this as one that we really want to bring to the public's attention to get their input on. I like the idea, you know, got to own it for 5 years before you subdivide it, and then put a 15-year restriction on it after that. That disincentivizes anybody who's scheming to get to a subdivision.
Yeah.
You know, I got 10 years before I'm retiring, and I sort of want to turn it into a subdivision, but I don't want to fool with all the, you know, the administrative.
Right. Right.
You know, that would sort of dampen that desire.
Yep. I'm good with it.
I mean, I agree to your outline too. I think it'll keep more agricultural land in agricultural use longer with the greater restriction on a bootleg subdivision, family subdivision.
So I'm hearing 5 and 15 is good.
All right.
See, hit
Okay.
nods.
All right. Next up, we're going to go to Division 3. This is design requirements. There's quite a bit in here. It's the overall design. So access, frontage, blocks. We're going to go over frontage, access, and streets. I know that Mr. DeVries has something he wants to note about blocks. So we'll get through these 3, which I don't think will be super quick, but we'll get through these, and then we'll open it up to anything else that you all want to call out. And Lewis, I'm going to need you to remind them, but also teach us again what exactly you all do for access now. It reads a little confusing in the subdivision ordinance, and it's probably different in practice. So I'll go over what we have proposed in front of you, and then Lewis, if you'll just come in and tell us how that compares to what happens now. So in section 10.3.5 for frontage, what we have here is that all lots are required to front on a street. It can be public or private. From what I understand, the current regulations are that all lots have to front on a public street. So tailing off of that, we have access in section 10.3.6. And the way it reads now is you essentially have 3 buckets. You have an access standard for 6 or more lots, 6 lots exactly, or 3 to 6 lots. What we have done here is just made it much simpler. You have 2 buckets, access for major subdivisions and access for minor. Now, side note, grain of salt, this could be different based on the final decision for what is a major subdivision. But in the context of what we're looking at and what's in front of you, we'll just pretend that everybody agrees it's 10 or more. And if we change that tonight, this will come into it and we can tweak it as needed. But what we have now is that the two buckets, there's an access chart for major subdivisions that tells you exactly how many you need. And then there's one for minor subdivisions. We have added a provision that if any proposed subdivision results in a total of 10 or more lots on an existing private street, that road must be improved to VDOT standards. That doesn't mean that a new subdivision of 10 or more lots is coming in, but let's say that 6 lots are using an existing street. And then I come in and I do a minor subdivision of 5, and I bump that entire road as over a total of 10, I'm gonna have to make that road a private road or a public, even though I am only building a minor subdivision. And that's just to slowly but surely get you all a little bit further away from those private roads that you have. And the other thing that we cleaned up here is we have added that chart for minor subdivision access, and we have set a maximum of 2 access points. Right now, I'm going to let Lewis speak to it, but it seems a little bit, maybe not all over the place. I'll let you talk. But we base this off of what major is. Right now, major subdivisions, I want to say up to 30 lots can only have 1 access point. So we're saying that any minor subdivision can have up to 2 maximum. So we can tweak these numbers, but I'll let Lewis explain how this looks compared to the existing.
So I'll go to what you were saying before about the private roads. So as it stands right now, no more than 6 lots. Is it no more than 6? Okay. 6 lots can be accessed by a private road. Once we enforce it similarly, that if I'm on that road and I want to create a 7th lot, then I would have to upgrade that road to VDOT standards. You may remember there was an exception last year off Little Chatterton Lane for someone trying to do something similar. So that I like the language they put in there. It's a lot more clear now. But that just changes the threshold from instead of 6, now that's 10. The other change would be the accesses to minor subdivisions. Currently, minor subdivisions can have a maximum of 3 access points. If they want any more, they can come to the Planning Commission, but this would bump that down to just 2.
Thank you. See, so much easier than trying to read your current subdivision ordinance. So do you want me to go over anything that we proposed, or do you have a pretty decent handle on it? Any thoughts? Again, it may be hard to we'll have to just keep talking in circles with each other if we're thinking about taking major back down to 6, but hopefully that won't halt conversation. Just know it might have to morph if we decide to tweak that as well.
I'm good with it. I mean, take it around, but any concerns amongst the commissioners? Okay.
This is one of those examples where the policy didn't change much, but it looks and it reads very differently. So just to remind you, I know it looks alarming, but it turns out it's very similar to what you're doing. To this, then I will move on to streets, if anybody has anything. Okay. And we've touched on some of this so far, but this is a little bit more detail here. So this is section 10.3.8, and we're going to go over 3 big items that I want to call attention to. Item E, we have required here now that curbs, gutter, and sidewalk are required for all streets in subdivisions within residential districts. So Mr. DeVries, we can make that say R1, R2, R3. If you'll make a note of that, Rebecca, before I forget. But that was the intent there. It would be R1, R2, R3, where the majority of lots are 25,000 square feet or less. That currently is 22,000. And why we changed it is we've changed it to reflect what you all decided on in Article 4, the minimum lot sizes for water and sewer. So it's really just to be consistent and not be kind of willy-nilly. So that's how we got to that point. Item G, public streets. This is more or less just a recap because it sounds like it's what's happening now. Required in all major subdivisions, so that's no change there. And then we've also added in here that if a proposed subdivision is on a public street that's less than 50 feet in width, that would need to be added to get to at least 50 feet. So additional right-of-way would need to be added there. And then moving to item H, similarly to what you have now, these are permitted in minor and family subdivisions. And then again, we went over this before. We've added that provision. It sounds like you're doing it now. If I come in on an existing public street and I subdivide in such a way that there are now 10 or more lots using that street, I need to improve it to be a VDOT road. Any questions about these? I know at least one person has some other things to bring up in this division, so we can get through these things and then, before we do that, did any of this street and access talk change or help earlier conversations about major and minor? If anyone's feeling heavily like, I think it needs to be back to 6, I'm firm, we can talk about it now. It's going to keep coming up a little bit, but if anything has helped you either get more towards that or further away from it, you can tell us now.
Well, structurally, if it's just the roads and streets that differentiate, the issues around major and minor, I mean, we could keep it at 6, but then require, we're just making an artificial division between major and minor, and for a specific piece of the ordinance, it says, from 6 to 9, it has this additional requirement that doesn't exist for 5 or less, or 6 or less. But if you're doing resulting in 10 plus lots, regardless whether it's major or minor, that's a nomenclature that isn't statutory.
Okay, I think
Add additional requirement, and I know it's undesirable because it gets all twisty, but lesser or greater, and there'll probably be other instances that where a minor subdivision in a particular location may have requirements that a minor, that a six lot development in another place wouldn't impact. Like if you're on a public road already, or if you're on a private road.
I think that's similar to what we were tossing around earlier. So I'm going to give you all whiplash and say, let's put a pin in this again. And then, Mr. DeVries, I'll give it to you if you want to tell us your thoughts on blocks. And then if there's anything else in this division specifically, and then we'll come back to this major versus minor.
Well, number one is
the ambiguous language about agriculturally zoned versus residentially zoned. That doesn't mean anything anymore.
So in this, again, our intent would have been in A1, it would be in the letter A1, R1, R2, R3, and then A2 would be A1, A2, A3, but we can change that.
Well, we have to have something that triggers cluster being residential use. It has to be hardwired into this thing.
So, Mr. DeVries, would you be proposing more of standards based on the average lot size?
I would. I very much like what we were just talking about with streets, how streets and blocks are going to be different for R1 versus mixed use. We got to scale these things as lots go, sizes, frontages go up and down.
Okay.
I mean, you've interpreted a cluster subdivision, a block in a cluster subdivision as being 2,000 feet long on 40,000 square foot lots with 100-foot frontages, and it leads to very, very bad planning, very bad design, I should say. So I want to get in front of clusters specifically. I think did we ever talk about definitions?
And
never really covered definitions, did we?
Definitions of what?
specifically the word block.
You should have it there in your packet, but
So we did provide definitions for this article. I think what Lewis just mentioned might be the solution here, because even if we specify out the residential R1, R2 and the ag A1, A2, you still have the quandary of cluster within those. And so I think maybe instead of calling out the districts and saying lot sizes of, average this size has to have, this many feet. If you're smaller, it's this many feet. That might be the solution here instead of calling out the specific districts.
Tie it strictly to lot size. Average lot size, I guess. So what you're saying?
Right, yes, average lot size.
I understand what you're saying, but I still want to get in front of the definitions. I really want to hardwire these definitions to mean what a block is it's identifying circulation of traffic. A division of a block is a traversable right of way, or even a roundabout, I suppose.
so you should have it in your packets. The definition of block that we've given you is an area of land bounded by streets or by a combination of streets and public parks, cemeteries, railroads, rights of way, shorelines of waterways, or boundary lines of King George County.
Yeah, I don't like it.
Okay, do you want to get us?
You change that, or is that the old one?
I don't know. I could look and see what yours is now. But if you want to get one that you like and maybe get it to Lewis or Heather and they can forward it on to us.
Do you know, Lewis, if that's been changed, or if this is new, or this is the old one?
It has been updated.
It has?
The old one, yep.
Okay.
Do you mind to read out what you have now? Do you have it, Richard?
Sure. A block is defined as a unit of land bounded by streets or by a combination of streets and public land, railroad right-of-ways, waterways, or any other barrier to the continuity of a development.
Okay. Yeah, and that's led to some really weird interpretations of, I mean, I'm thinking of one on Eden Drive where staff interpreted that division to be simply an open space frontage between two lot frontages. That's not a barrier in my mind. It doesn't do anything to alleviate traffic or aid traffic circulation. It doesn't break up the subdivision in any meaningful way.
Yeah, so the definition we have proposed does not contain or barrier.
Okay.
I would also like to point out 10-3-7C. It says under intersections, it says to ensure interconnection streets to achieve a grid pattern, all blocks shall be separated by an intersection. So is that implying that the barrier be a intersection? Because I believe that's what.
I believe it is implying it, but it's only implying it, and that's my complaint.
Yep.
It's just an implication. It's not explicit.
And it's not in the definition.
Right. It's not explicit enough. And that should be reflected in the definition you gave us.
Does everyone agree with the provision and think, yes, they should be delineated by intersections? Because if so, that's easy enough to reflect it in the definition. But I just want to make sure no one has quandary with it being in there at all.
I don't.
Okay. Because that's easy enough to stick into the definition, so it's in both places. All right. It sounds like that's the move on that one. Yes?
And again, the 1,000-foot versus 2,000-foot, that's got to be scaled to lot size.
So that will tweak based on lot size groups instead of those. And in what have we been doing all these months? And I don't remember. When we send it back to you all to look at on your own, make sure you take a look at that and see if you agree. If not, of course, let us know.
Sorry. Oh, I'll let Mr. Fox.
Sorry, I just had a quick question relating to 1038D cul-de-sacs. You've put these length limits in there of 600 feet in a residential and 1,800 feet in an agricultural. Just wondering, is this benchmarked to some standard, or How did you derive these figures?
I want to say that the cul-de-sac language came from the current ordinance. So if it's not working or if it's been an absolute and definable problem, then we could look into it. But we took this language from existing policy and standard.
So I recall talking about this once, the increased size for agricultural was for implements and any farm-related machinery that would require a larger turning radius.
Okay, I mean, they looked a little short to me, but okay, if that's what it is, that's what it is.
I'm gonna look at Stafford, Spotsylvania, folks around you. And I'll put it, just so you all know, so you know the process, Mr. Fox, what we do after these meetings is we get some meeting minutes ready and sort of that go over the conversation and what we will do, whether it's like a defined, add this word into this sentence or research XYZ. And then we get it to staff and I believe they share it with you. So we'll look into that and just see if somebody else is doing something drastically different or if you're pretty on par with other folks. So that way you'll know.
That'd be very helpful.
Before we move on, would it be okay to point out some differences in those access standards we
Yeah,
just
please
talked
do.
about? So,
Yeah. And if before Lewis, sorry to cut you off, this one was it's chopped up. It repeats a lot, this current subdivision ordinance, and they know it like the back of their hand. So if there is something that you are curious about, like, hey, how does this stack up to what we're doing now that we didn't bring up, please feel free to ask Lewis because we probably won't know. So if there is something else that that isn't going to touch on, please ask.
So what I wanted to point out could potentially be a change when it comes to minor subdivisions and private roads. There are no standards for private roads that access less than 4 lots. Between 4 and 5 lots, we do have similar access standards to what is proposed, but less than that, there are none. Through reading this ordinance, it looks like that changes in any private road. So if it accesses 2 or more lots, has to meet those private road standards. Is that correct? Yes. So that changes a bit in what we see with our current ordinance a lot, since we do allow 3 accesses to an existing road. A lot of times what they'll do for a 5-lot minor subdivision is have 2 lots have direct access and then a easement that wouldn't have to meet any of our standards to access the remaining 3. So that would change. And of course, those easements and roads that are shared currently, although they wouldn't be controlled by an HOA, they would have a road maintenance agreement, which they will also have under this new ordinance.
Any heartburn, questions, comments? No? Okay. Thank you, Lewis. Okay, with that, we are going to move on to divisions 6, 7, and 8. But before we do, a couple of quick things that aren't up here on the slide, but I just want to remind you. We're not going to go over it in detail. It's pretty run of the mill, but that division, I want to say 4, maybe 5, is the HOA requirements. So just take a look at that. We've gone over it briefly. Essentially, if there's anything common or shared in any subdivision, HOA is required. And then division 4 is your guarantees, sureties, bonds, all the same word. Again, those are pretty much what code allows you. We are not going to review those tonight. I want to say maybe 1 or 2 things was tweaked, but again, those things were just changed to get you in line with code. So we'll keep going. If there's anything you want to touch base on there, we can come back to it, but otherwise we'll keep trucking along. Okay, so 6, 7, and 8 in one form or another are about plats.
So before we go on to this, I was waiting for the time where we could address other issues that were not in there. So fire suppression. major subdivisions, minor subdivisions, there's no requirement for fire suppression systems.
What do you all do now, Louis?
Major subdivisions would get reviewed by fire and rescue, but minor subdivisions typically would not.
All right, so I spoke to Chief Mooney, and he said, nope, it's not in the fire rescue outline. There's no requirement in there. And agreed that it should be in the subdivision ordinance. Now I know the service authority, they have some heartburn with what I'm about to, push, but there are issues with wells, and that's understandable. But if you have a commercial well in a major subdivision that is dry, you have your pump house, you have the system, you're only going to activate it when it's needed. So it's not going to be constant. You're not going to be pulling from the aquifer consistently. It's not going to be wet. Well, it doesn't have to be wet. It can be dry. So that's something that I would like to see in our subdivision ordinance. I would like to see an opportunity for homeowners in subdivisions to put a fire out instead of by bucket.
We're going to write it down and look into it. Are there any localities that you know of that do it
Come to my house.
well? We'll look at some different places and either include something, or depending on what we find, we'll bring it to you all and maybe have you look at it and then give us a call.
Louis, it's a real possibility that there's going to have to be a discussion between not only what we're doing here, but also Chief Moody and also Service Authority. I've spoken to some folks on Service Authority briefly about this, so I do know the heartburn. But I think we get down to definitions, and I think that the definitions are probably worded inaccurately, because I cannot believe that you can't drill a hole in the ground and leave it there. I am certain, personal opinion, I shouldn't say certain, I'm pretty confident, just thinking about it logically, that if the issue is the draw from the aquifer, then it would be that consistent, we're burning through that resource more rapidly. But in real terms, you would only activate systems like this in an emergency, and it would be for the duration of that emergency and no more. But right now, there are large neighborhoods with no fire suppression. I've got a crap load of buckets. Not fair.
So if I can get, do you say your neighborhood does or does not have?
Does not.
Okay. See. Yeah. I don't know many that do. Okay.
Okay, I don't have an answer for you tonight, but we will look at it and we'll get you something. Okay, anything else that we haven't touched on so far in design requirements? No? Okay. All right, 6, 7, and 8. So these are basically your plat requirements. And again, I'm just going to drive this home. Overall policy has not changed. I want to say here, it was really one big change, and everything else was just to clarify or to make it less muddy. So one thing that we did require here is for preliminary plats. I believe right now that the language suggests a sketch plat or welcomes one, but for any subdivision that's going to require a preliminary plat, that a sketch plat come first. That's a requirement. It would come into the office. It would be reviewed with various, entities, making sure everybody's on the same page. If something needs to tweak, and just to back up a step, just to give you all a refresher and a 101 on what Code of Virginia says, preliminary plats are only required for subdivisions of 50 or more lots. Otherwise, they are not required, and you cannot require them. So if you have a subdivision of 49 lots, it would just go straight to a final plat. So that sketch plat would only come in for those preliminary plats. So again, that's something that's suggested now. We've made it a requirement. Moving on to final plat, section 10.7.2. This is just more or less a terminology change. The current subdivision ordinance talks about exempt subdivisions, which can be very misleading. And essentially what we assumed this meant, and Lewis, I think we're right, but tell me if I'm wrong, is that it's exempt from your review. That doesn't mean that a plat doesn't need to be made. So what we've done here is just revised that language to be administratively approved. Again, I don't believe that that's changing from what it is now. So what that means is that single lot subdivisions, family subdivisions, and minor subdivisions are administratively approved, as well as boundary line adjustments. So just revise that language. And then the other thing that we did here is in construction plans, that's section 10.8.1. And what we've done is for subdivisions that are less than 50 lots, so requiring a preliminary plat, or sorry, not requiring a preliminary plat, the construction plans would be required after the approval of a final plat. For subdivisions that are 50 or more, thus requiring a preliminary plat, that construction plan could either come in conjunction with or after the approved final plat. Essentially, we're trying to get it so that construction plans are not coming before there is a final plat of some sort. In the event that things change, you don't know what's going to be built, where it's going to be built. And then let's say that I come in with my construction plans and a final plat. It's the first time I've ever been in here, and my final plat is all wrong. I've just shelled out however much money to get those construction plans made, and when I have to go back to the drawing board. So it's also a little bit of a crutch for the developer so that they have their ducks in a row before they get too invested in it. So those are the changes that we made overall for plats and plans. Nothing else too crazy here that we changed or tweaked or removed.
It
So
sounds backwards to me. You're saying plat must be approved and recorded before construction
it
plan?
has to be approved. It doesn't have to be recorded. It just needs to be approved.
Okay.
Lewis, what do you all do now? Because I know this was also in our conversations as well.
Yes. Right now you can submit a construction plan, but before you submit a final plat, but you would have to submit a final plat before the construction plan gets approved. But it is kind of opposite of what's being proposed, is what we currently do.
It works, doesn't it? Does it? I mean, it makes sense and works, doesn't it?
Yes, I like them to run more hand in hand than one before the other, because with the construction plan, there's a lot to look at. So you could lose some of the more technical zoning ordinance stuff, but also with a construction plan, that includes a lot, more different stuff such as ENS and stormwater. So some of that has to change. It could shift lots around and that sort of thing. That could become a problem if you do that after the plat's approved.
There are a lot more people looking at the construction plan, which would influence changes on it and subsequently the plat. There are fewer people looking at the plat. So the changes are going to be driven through the construction plan.
That's how it works now, simply because the construction plan is submitted first. And as you said, there are more people looking at the construction plan. But I do think
so you're saying as long as the final plat is submitted concurrently with is something that would work better?
I could see it both ways. I mean, with it submitted with, it'd be easier to look at just what's in the zoning ordinance instead of trying to do that at the time of construction plan, because you also don't want to get in a situation where you approve a construction plan and then you get to the plat and you say, oh, none of these lots are even going to work. And then everything, including stormwater and all that stuff, has to be redesigned. So it is sort of a chicken or the egg kind of thing.
And it might be, I think, Mr. DeVries, it might be good to just have these say in conjunction with, so that they're both there, you're looking at both things together, and if there's errors in one, you know, you can fix it in the other. I mean,
Then administratively, you can just say, well, you're not getting your construction permit until we get a plat submitted.
right.
You can't record the plat until the construction plans are.
Doing it that way does benefit in terms of administration. I think there, you know, is maybe some cons to the developer, but, you know.
I think flexibility is really the driver here, leaving the developer with some flexibility to have the county maybe opine on things that in conjunction with one another. Where you want to have approvals, the sequence of approvals is almost a different issue from when the county, essentially the door is open to come in and talk about things preliminarily.
Right, and that's a good point in terms of the developer. They should do those preliminary sketches and hopefully catch any of those issues ahead
Reality,
of
there's always a
time.
bit of parallel pathing going on. It's not sequential necessarily. Yeah.
Right.
But the approvals can certainly be sequential.
I'm not passionate about it one way or the other. Whatever works best for or the planning office to me.
Concurrent?
That's what I would say, but let me talk to Heather as well, since she also reviews the plan, and also get with Richard, and we can decide together.
Okay.
So I want it to make sense, but I don't necessarily, for approval purposes, but I don't necessarily want to put a developer into a situation where he's expending a lot of money unnecessarily. So, I mean, I sort of leave that to you and Heather and others to figure out how you can sort of service both sides of that
He
equation.
has to do both, so it's really a question to me.
Yeah, all right.
You don't want to inadvertently create barriers to entry in any sense.
All right. Any other thoughts on these? Okay. All right. And I just want to remind you before we move on to Division 9 and 10, the approval process for this stuff hasn't changed. Final plats will still come to you, to the agent first, make sure all the ducks are in a row. They'll come to you and then move on to board. But I just wanted to drive home one more time that there weren't some big changes here.
Just a correction there. That had changed recently with that by right subdivision text amendment. Final plats that are by right do not go to the planning commission. They get reviewed internally. It's
So
only
the way we have it now for those administratively approved final plats. So this would just be 50, basically for major subdivisions. Is planning commission reviewing?
planning commission would not review a major subdivision unless it had a preliminary plat.
Okay.
So if a 40 lot major subdivision came in now, it would not go to the planning commission for review unless they were asking an exception or anything like that. As long as it was a by right subdivision.
Okay. Our language may be not saying that. If it isn't, we're going to fix it. Are you all happy with that process now? That's what you want to keep?
40 lots without review? No. That's what they can do right now. So we said they can do a couple months. It's by right.
Right.
It's by right. There's no planning commission or say denied. Something, some other review.
Like, for something that's by right.
Staff on that, because that was driven by staff, wasn't it?
Yes, that was driven by staff. Is it also driven just by a sense to help out developers to streamline the process?
Right.
Because sometimes that having to hold that meetings and have planning commission approval would extend the subdivision process. And
Yeah, I think we came through that.
We did.
Okay. Yeah, I think we came through that pretty.
So catch me up for just a moment, because I feel like I'm hearing you that this was a recent change to your ordinance, and we may not have had that version when we were working through this. So
It
explain
should
that.
have been. It
Okay.
would have been close, but it would have been before that. I will double check to make sure you had the most updated ordinance, but I believe it would be in there.
But so what you said was the preliminary plat or more than 50 lots comes to the planning commission.
Mm-hmm. And I also believe the Board of Supervisors approves preliminary plats.
Right. And then the final plat is approved by,
Is administrative,
is administrative.
as long as it's not a rezoning sort of thing. If it's just a by right subdivision and they are not asking for any sort of exceptions or anything like that.
So with that being said, I'm going back to our original discussion of major versus minor subdivisions. So when we're talking about a major subdivision of 12 lots, does that go currently before the planning commission? $49 or less, it does not. Okay. Yes, as Stephanie mentioned at the beginning of this, localities are truly all over the map in terms of where they stand on this subdivision approval. I mean, I know of localities that administrative approval is like 2 lots, and anything more than 2 lots has to have additional approval through planning commission and the governing body. So that's, one extreme. And then, the other end is 50 lots, 100 lots. I mean, and then it's, all in between. So it's really up to each locality. So to me, if you're going to keep the process of 49, 49 and under do not come to you, then the question of the major subdivision being 10 lots is not that important.
I don't know. Well, no, there's still infrastructure requirements and such that go along with it. So
I would also like to point something out when it comes to preliminary plats. So when a preliminary plat is required, the state code says that if a plat shows the division of 50 or more lots, it's not necessarily a 50 or more lot subdivision of a parent tract. So if I kind of phase a large subdivision into 49 lots in one plat and 49 in another final plat, I can avoid that preliminary plat. That's also that's what sort of what we've determined through the how the state code is written.
I'm trying to quickly read code and make sense of it all in live time. While Rebecca's thinking, and I know I keep asking this, but is everyone likes what happens now, or do you all want to see more? Because it sounds like you all were seeing more, but then maybe the overall idea in the county was to make it a little easier and streamlined. So that's how you all got to the process now. So what we have in the proposed ordinance is not what you're doing now. So I just want to make sure that if you like what's recently been changed and it's working, that we reflect that in what we have. But if you don't love it, now is the time to figure out what you might love.
As I remember the conversation, we were seeing things come before us that were by right.
Right.
And therefore, we
There
could
was no-
comment on them,
Right.
but we had no basis to say no,
Right.
or even to recommend somebody else say no.
Correct.
So it was like, what's the point of it?
Correct.
But, you know, I think I'm seconding what somebody else said was, I still want to know about it.
Right.
And
And I think they addressed that by putting it in the director's report. Was that not
Well,
That's the current.
correct?
no, we would see it once. We were basically eliminating a second need to come before the planning commission in most instances, right, Lewis?
No, never seen.
Oh, hold on.
Yes, it was eliminating the need for subdivisions that met the ordinance that were by right, and to have that extra step of going to the planning commission.
And was notification through like the director's report as far as a need to inform us, if you will? Is that not?
Now,
Yes.
once we've eliminated that, then we did start doing those more detailed director's reports so that you would still know about
Correct.
any major subdivisions or site plans that are under review.
So does that not satisfy the curiosity to know? No?
I think in my mind, we were trying to, remove an administrative hurdle that
Mhm.
didn't appear to have any real purpose.
Correct.
You know, I would still like to see the plans, even if I'm not going to take an action on them or a recommendation on them.
But let me ask you this, are the plans, are they common knowledge? I mean, the average Joe can come in and request to see those plans? Is that,
Of course, everything in our office is public.
so if that is the desire, then we all are normal citizens, correct? So if that's what you want to do, then by your right as a citizen. But I don't think it's something that just has to come before the board for the sake of having to come across the board. That's my,
Well, I mean, the point of not having it come before the board because we can't deny it does not remove from us the public transparency, the public comment, the disclosure. I mean, the public can't cancel a plan. We can, we can deny, approve.
no, that's what he was just saying. If it's something that's by right, then no.
Right, if it's by right, we can't stop it. But we can know about it, and so can the public.
And again,
The public has a right to comment. The public may or may not be able to stop it, but we represent them.
yeah, we do. We represent the county in that we make recommendations to the board of supervisors. That's what we do. Now, to have something to come across just so that we are informed about it, something that is by right, I think that's why we came to that conclusion, correct? Lewis, if I'm wrong.
That was part of it, yes.
So, I don't think convoluting and putting barriers in the way of someone who's trying to apply for something that there's no reason for it. I mean, other than, again, it's by right. So, let it be.
Right. Is there a director's report today, Louis?
There is not today. There will be one at your meeting on the 13th.
Is everyone on, is majority of folks up here good with the way it happens now? Who doesn't like the way it happens now? Or is everybody okay with keeping it the way it is? What's the majority? Oh, gosh, sorry.
I'm unhappy with the way it is, but I lost this argument last year, so I'm not gonna lose it again tonight.
Let me ask y'all, so again, from a more global perspective, what do other localities do? I mean, what do you see? I understand they probably all do something a little different, but what's the sort of more consensus approach to these things?
I mean, like I said, I've seen them all over the board, and I can't tell you, where does the majority sit, and especially in terms of similar localities, I think that would be important. Um, the the thing is, when we were proposing the 10 lots, not being aware of the 50 lot process that you've just recently adopted, our thought process was thinking that you were at 6 lots and that should be at least loosened some. Because as stated, if things are by right, if it's meeting the ordinance requirements, it truly is a waste of your time and a waste of the public's time to think that they have some influence over that decision when they do not.
And we did go into that because it does give sort of a false hope that people come in here and.
Which is why some localities do choose that extreme of just straight administrative approval. Because again, if it meets, code says if it meets the ordinance requirements, you don't get to deny it or ask for different things. If it meets it, it's approved. So, which is just some background as to why some folks go on that loose extreme of if it matches and it meets, we feel comfortable with what we have in our ordinance. So in return, we feel comfortable with what's coming in the door.
I think we settled in on actions that we're requesting an exception, a variance, as a rezoning, those kind of things where that we actually had the ability to say yes or no to. And so, I mean, I hear the comment about, yes, if I'm that interested in what it looks like on paper, I can go into the county's offices and look at it. As a body, as long as we're informed about it and are aware of it, I don't want to create a waste of time, an extra burden on the county's offices, an extra burden on the applicants, the developers. So, I mean, I'm not happy with it either, but I think I saw that it was a no-win kind of a position.
So I'm seeing, as Mr. Kendrick's speaking, I'm seeing some head nods in agreement with what he is saying. And so with that in mind, I would say we would leave what you have now at your 50 plus. And especially considering that this is a fairly recent change, let's not, reinvent the wheel there. And so with that in mind, I think we do have some text changes on our end to make sure that it's matching with your current process, and we'll make sure that we do those. And if there's no other objections on that, I think that sort of settles our major minor question, and we've got just a little bit more that we need to get through.
Lewis, could I ask, could you just email one of us sort of that process that you just went through, and so it's crystal clear for me, and just so we know. All right, one more slide, and then we're going to go back to the major minor. So this is Division 9 and 10, vacation of plats, and then your violation penalty fees. So for the vacation of plats, items D and E, and this is section 10.9.1. We've just added in some provisions here that the subdivision agent can vacate plats either before or after they're sold for minor, single lot, and family subdivision plats. That would not be the case for major. Those would come to the commission. And then we've also just referenced the code process. It's pretty dense. It's a hard one to try and put into common terms. It's a lot of legalese. So what we've done here is just reference the code section. This doesn't happen often. So basically what will happen is if someone needs to vacate or that process comes up, they would just go to the code section that's referenced and follow those steps. Down to violation, we have just added a reference to Article 2 administration. This is to prevent text conflicts. If things change over time, you only have to change it in one place. Rebecca brought this up earlier, or maybe it was me, somebody. Now that they're in the same zoning and subdivision ordinance, the enforcement, penalties, fees, those sorts of things will be the same. There's no need to do it twice. Because again, if you change it in one place, you could easily forget to do it in another. So often throughout this ordinance, we have referenced other divisions, particularly for permits or processes, appeals, those sorts of things. This is no different than where we've done it other places. If you're in violation, it will follow the processes of Article 2, Division XYZ. Any questions about these two? These are pretty straightforward. Okay. I know everyone's super excited about it. So we're going to go all the way back to the beginning. And are we settled? Are we settled on major minor? Okay. Wow, that was shocking. I didn't know that. Okay. I'm back in the room, guys.
I mean, is it material? I mean, it's, we're setting up the standards for staff to review and determine compliance and non-compliance with standard. I'm still not comfortable about us not seeing $10 million projects come through, and we don't approve or deny now. We recommend to the Board of Supervisors. So, I mean, by the rationale, if we can't do anything about it, then why do we do anything? It's the public's access.
We do have sole approval authority over plats subject to a GDP. That does not go to the board, correct?
I stand corrected, but I mean, it can be within the ordinance and noxious to the public. And that's the public's opportunity to say, this was noxious. I don't want this to happen again. Supervisors, we need a new ordinance that prohibits circuses or something. That what staff determines fits the by right definition may be wrong. Innocently and course of their duties. It could be an interpretation of a statute, but it would give us as a body the information we need to make recommendations on general policies to the Board of Supervisors and ordinances to the Board of Supervisors, and with the basis to do so.
So I hear you, but here's at least where I'm coming from, is that doesn't do us a lot of good to pour over something that we don't have the basis to say yes or no to. Now, I've seen plans come through here that I generally object to because I think they meet the ordinance requirements, but the way they do it just seems unlivable, awkward, for all those kinds of sort of soft reasons. And that's the reason I sort of want to see them, because as you're saying, I want to be able to go on record as saying, yes, it meets the requirements, but maybe we ought to go back and look at the requirements again so that we don't continue to have these kinds of developments. I'm sort of relying upon staff to share enough information with us as a body, not as an individual, but as a body, to see things that even they probably look at and go, it's a little questionable, but I don't have the basis legally to say no. The Board of Supervisors don't either. So we can recommend till the cows come home. If there's not a legal basis to deny something, then, it ain't going to happen. But that's what we constantly do, is keep reviewing these things. As hard as we work to make these ordinances good, we constantly find things that, like, unintentionally, they're sort of not turning out the way we thought they would, and we need to tweak them. So that's what I'm looking for to see, is us to have that opportunity to suggest to the Board of Supervisors that we want to go into a particular ordinance and tweak it and have them know that that's what we're doing, so they can say yes or no.
Right, and that,
But I don't want to go back into the point of bogging down the process.
and I agree with Mr. Kendrick from that standpoint, is that because King George in so many ways is geographically disparate, it's, you know, the way the land is developed in various areas. We have a lot of case specific instances where things that work one place may not work at all somewhere else, or may not seem to be incongruity with the rest of the developments around it. That said, you know, this is also our opportunity as we come through this to implement additional language or verbiage or whatever we want to put in there to come through these new zoning and planning ordinances to have the best we can, right? To the best of our knowledge as we know it now. But I agree with Mr. Kendrick also. Like, I know there were a number of subdivisions that were coming before us that I was getting calls on. They were by right. Like, I want to be open and honest about it. Like, hey, we're going to see it and we're going to have a public hearing, but at the end of the day, there's nothing we can do about it. It's by right. So I don't know that I want to go back to having a meeting just to pontificate about something that we really can't affect any measurable change on, right? Because at the end of the day, we're just an advisory body anyway.
Right,
And
right. And we advise on the proffers as we used to. We do not now.
and what I wouldn't want to do also is implement additional meetings on things that we can't affect any change on. And after a while, the board's going to get tired of hearing that. So what we're advising. So I think the way it's structured now, at least the things that we can advise on are the things we can affect change on, and they can be meaningful recommendations that we pass forward to the Board of Supervisors. Again, if I'm wrong, tell me, or if I'm off base, but I don't want to beat this ad nauseum, because at the end of the day, we're going to come back to the original point that by right is by right, and it may look funky, you know, it's like a Speedo. I could wear one, but I shouldn't, right? So I mean, it might, but I can't. So
how do you think,
right, Mr. Dines? Thank you.
The states, that's how the state writes the legislation. The state modifies this. We're going into a scenario now where development rights are marketable. Conservatorships, all kinds of land use innovations that we have little experience with here.
Right.
But if you sell your development rights, it's not by right anymore. Or if you derive an advantage for development, if you know, we're going to be walking to scenarios where to say the public can't change the law in Virginia, you know, or can't write the ordinance to prevent, you know, toxic spills or whatever.
Yeah, all of that can be done, but it's done through a process. And what Mr. Parker said, what Mr. Kendrick is saying, is that we're just not in that process of something that's by right. Simply put, at this
point, advisors to the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors, you know, are the legislative body here, and they are the ones who would take the issue to the state and say, we have an issue here. We're a waterfront community with, you know,
Well,
military
if
base,
I may,
and this doesn't make sense for us.
You'd have to go to the court. But
if
we
I
do
may,
periodically come back to these ordinances and have discussions about them. Just tonight, we're talking about fire protection and subdivisions, you know, basically putting in fire hydrants, you know, and we sort of recognize that we couldn't turn down a subdivision request because we didn't address that in our ordinances. But if we do make it, then we can. So, I mean, we're constantly tweaking the ordinances to do what you're talking about within our ability to do so. larger issues, you're right. Go down to the state, they come back and tell us the way it's going to be. And that's what we rely upon these folks to do, is to make sure we're not trying to do something in violation of that. So again, it comes back to just want to be aware of what's going on in case we as a body aren't real thrilled about it. Then we can have the discussion about what can we tweak that's within our authority to do so to have an impact upon that. Beyond that, we're individuals. We can go out and get involved in the political process any way we want, but
No, we
that's
can't.
not what you can.
We can't like a citizen can. We have
You
constraints.
can as a citizen.
I can as a
But
citizen.
this body, I don't think that's what we're supposed to be doing. But now I'm off onto a whole different kind of conversation.
Yeah, if I could bring us back for a moment, but I appreciate your comment, because that's what I want to say too, is that we recommend, and I think we even put it in when we did the diagnostic, is that, you know, once this ordinance is adopted, it doesn't just sit and you wait 10 years and hire us back to revamp it again. You know, this should be something that you're looking at annually, or if not each year, biannually, and rely on staff to come to you at those timeframes to say, here's the ugly things that we're seeing and we need to fix. Here's the language that we're proposing for the ordinance, and here's why. This is what we're seeing. And then you can make those informed decisions, correct any things that's happening before it becomes the whole county has developed this issue. So do it on a regular basis. Make sure you're looking back at this, tweaking and fixing those problems. We do have one more question tonight regarding, while a portion of that major minor subdivision is a moot point because of the 50 lot process, there is still the tipping point for private road versus public road. And right now that's at 6 lots. So do you want that to stay, unless make sure I'm right, Lewis, that's at 6 lots right now, requires the public road. As written, it's 10 lots that we have drafted. So do you want that to stay at your 6 currently, or do you want that to be at the 10 that we have proposed?
I don't know how you can.
I don't know how you can regulate that across all different zoning districts with one paragraph.
What is your concern, or what districts do you think should not have the public road, or should be allowed private?
Basically, I don't want to make the imposition upon a developer. It's not like I've got a number or a linear foot of road that I'm thinking about. I'm just wondering, where do we want to make that imposition on a developer that he has to build a public road to VDOT specifications?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm thinking about, again, the difference between A2 and mixed use. That's a huge, huge difference in types of use.
I'm not so concerned about mixed use. Maybe I should be, but A1, A2, smaller lots.
Right.
Yeah, I think you should have public roads in there so that we know that they're being maintained to some level for those residents. In agricultural areas where you've got 20-acre lots or 10-acre lots, then I'm not quite as concerned, as long as there's some kind of a homeowners association in that kind of a subdivision who know what they're getting into when they buy into it.
Where's the trigger for A2 cluster? We have to build in a trigger for that.
What was the question?
You want it in R2, R3. Don't you want it in cluster 2 also?
I think in clusters, yeah, I would want to see public roads, because now you're talking multitude of small areas,
Right. And I think
There's a point here that could help, but Lewis, what's the strategic plan? Is it that strategically we're trying to get more of our roads to be VDOT compliant, or is the strategic plan to kind of take us in a different direction? I'm not going to give any kind of fencing around that. So from staff's position, what is the strategic plan that could probably help us make a more informed decision?
The purpose in the subdivision ordinance, one of the purposes is to provide safe, legal, efficient, and environmentally compatible ingress and egress to properties and neighborhoods. Is that not what you're looking for?
Very well put. Vague and
Well, Mr. Wallace, let's go back to your point. I mean, you talk about fire and rescue. Why wouldn't you want a VDOT standard road if you got, let's say, 6 houses, 24 people living on there, and there's somebody all the way at the back, and they got a dirt path? Like a fire truck getting bogged down there going back here because they're not going to have a fire hydrant.
yeah, personally, I'm in favor of
Okay.
VDOT standards, but you know, I don't want to control the discussion. That's just my opinion, you know, based on how I see the county.
Right.
I didn't want to say that because I didn't want to, you know, put that thought in someone else's mind.
Could we do a really quick, just like elementary raise of hands for people that want to, that are more inclined to keep it at 6?
Majority.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a way to skirt, for developers to skirt doing the right thing, quite honestly.
Well, it's not binary. It's not dirt road or VDOT road. There's a lot of in between.
Well, VDOT roads, VDOT minimum specs, so we know that.
Yeah.
So that's what.
But there's also a difference between dirt, gravel, hard surface, not necessarily to VDOT standards. I mean, we can write that in there somewhere in design standards.
But then there's
Private road serving more than 6 lots must be paved surface.
Don't you get into back end issues of maintenance and such, or?
Not if it's governed by an HOA. I mean, I think that's where it's coming from staff, is because nobody knew that they were in an HOA.
Yeah.
Because nobody was charging them an HOA bill.
Lewis, would it be difficult to maintain if we just said to a specific spec that wasn't a VDOT spec, that a private road would have to be maintained to that level? Wouldn't there be down the road repercussions that would be? I'm afraid of it
So
back on the county is what.
currently our ordinance does do that. For 4 and 5 lots, there are street requirements for private roads that access 4 and 5 lots. But there aren't any for 1 to 3, and then again above 5, it would be VDOT standards. If I can access the.
So I think, and what we did was just kind of smooth that out a little bit to say that anything less than the 10 has to comply, and we use the same standards that's in there now. But I don't think what Mr. DeVries is saying is, bump that standard up a little bit, make it paved, because I think that's not currently in there.
No, the current would be for roads is a 18-foot roadway that ends in a cul-de-sac. Also, I believe does give a minimum amount of gravel, but 6 inches of gravel. No. And positive drainage. Yep.
Do you want to change it so that private roads have to be paved?
No.
Okay.
Well, private roads? No.
I didn't know if that's what.
No, I'm trying to look for a happy medium.
Well, unfortunately, I think I saw majority say that they wanted, public for 6 or more. So that's what we will go with. And well, you can argue against that at another meeting.
I'll tell you where my thought comes in is that if we're going to call a minor subdivision 10 or less, I would like the roads to sort of follow that 10 or less kind of rule as well.
Well, I think we're gonna take it back to what it is now, and right? Am I losing it? Okay, so major subdivisions will be 6 or more.
Okay.
So we're gonna keep it with what you have, so you'll have less, so more private or more public.
Consistency is maintained. I'm happy with that.
And, to your point, Mr. Parker, for the, anything coming back on the county, there are a couple of times where we've said maintenance agreements, HOA, there's something in the HOA, language in section 10.3.14 that says the organization, the administration, whatever happens to that HOA also is not on the county. So it's basically, it's a nucleus, it needs to happen, but once, other than that, the county has no say in it, so nothing can really come back on you all. That's something else that we put in there. So there should be enough in here that if there's a big gaping pothole in a private road, it shouldn't be your fault.
Yeah, the problem is that it doesn't come back on us directly. It comes back on the Board of Supervisors through their constituents complaining to them, and then they turn around, and before you realize it, it's laying in our lap.
Yeah.
I think we're done. If anybody,
I just got one question, and
Okay.
this just educate me a little bit. The subdivision of a lot into 2 lots. Why are we calling that a subdivision? I'm thinking of a subdivision as minor subdivision, family subdivisions, major subdivisions. You take a lot and you split it into 2 as long as it meets the zoning of that area. I'm not sure why it's showing up in our subdivision ordinance.
It's a division.
It is a division, and it has to be addressed in terms of platting and that sort of thing. So we do talk about single division.
Is that just to capture it somewhere in our ordinances?
Yes.
Okay, I'm good.
And that is different than our current ordinance. Right now, if you were to just split one in half, you would have to meet minor subdivision requirements. So I believe this would loosen some of the burden on someone just splitting a parent tract in half, correct?
Yeah, it doesn't have to follow all of the minor subdivision requirements.
Rationale, I'm 100% for it.
it's another one of those things that keeps you informed, keeps it on record too, just so it's somewhere in the ether.
I'm not that much of a detailed person.
Okay, anything else?
One more argument, on VDOT roads, they're very expensive to build and to get approved, so think about that too. I mean, there should be a happy medium between private gravel road and a hard surface requirement and a VDOT road. Any takers on that one?
Nope.
Not selling me on that one.
Maybe at about
sympathetic, but-
6:15, someone would have taken the bait, but
Let me ask, is special exceptions allowed, or is it required ordinance change?
There's still the ability to apply for variance through the subdivision ordinance.
okay, anything else? All right, so next up, we have one definite. You'll have your next work session. That will be the 8th work session, 8th and final, at this point in time. Will be on January 24th. Now, there have been some conversations about revisiting the industrial district standards, looking into data centers, those sorts of things. That's still a conversation. So what may happen in January, you may look at some industrial stuff and some of those standards, or you'll look at the whole ordinance. It'll be one or the other. But all of the first stab at drafting, like I said, is complete at this point, with a couple of exceptions. We have tweaks to this, tweaks to some of the community design standards that we haven't gone through, and then of course the military overlay. But nothing else will be new from this point on. You've really reached the end, so good job. Not the end, but
Are you still looking at modeling noise contours that we talked about last time?
we'll have to get with staff on where we stand with
You
the
haven't been doing
military
anything
overlay,
with
but
that yet?
no development really since we looked at it the first time.
Yeah, I had that same question to see if we made any progress on the military overlay.
Okay, other than that, it's been a pleasure knowing and working with all of you, and
Yeah,
you'll be in good hands.
good luck.
Thank you.
Alrighty, that moves us on to our next item of business, which is new business, of which we have none. Next item of business, other business, which we have none. Brings us to our next item of business, which is the most exciting part of the evening. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Motion's been made. Motion's made and seconded. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for coming out.